The Yellowstone Secret. The morning mist clung to the treetops as I made my rounds along the Lamar Valley Trail. The crisp air carried the scent of damp earth and pine, and in the distance, I could hear the distant bugle of an elk. It was a normal day in Yellowstone, or at least it should have been. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. My name is Ranger Ethan Carter, and I've been stationed here for almost a decade. I've seen everything from bear attacks to lost hikers, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to uncover. It started with a report from a group of campers who had heard strange sounds near their site, low, guttural noises that sent shivers down their spines. They swore they had seen glowing eyes in the darkness, something unnatural. Normally, I'd chalk it up to paranoia or an overactive imagination, but there was something in their voices, something that told me they truly believed what they had seen. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to investigate before sunrise. With my flashlight in hand and my rifle slung over my shoulder, I followed the trail they had described, weaving through dense underbrush and towering lodgepole pines. The deeper I went, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The usual chorus of birds and insects had fallen silent, leaving only the sound of my own footsteps crunching against the forest floor. Then I found it, a narrow cave entrance, half hidden by a fallen tree and a thick blanket of moss. I'd patrolled this area dozens of times, but I'd never noticed it before. My pulse quickened as I crouched to get a better look. Something about it felt wrong. Swallowing my apprehension, I stepped inside. The tunnel was damp and cool, the air thick with an earthy scent. I moved cautiously, the beam of my flashlight sweeping over rough stone walls. The deeper I went, the more unnatural the cave felt, as if I were intruding on something ancient and undisturbed. Then I noticed the markings. Etched into the stone were symbols, spirals, jagged lines, and what looked like depictions of strange creatures. Some were humanoid, but grotesquely distorted, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. Others were beast-like, resembling wolves or bears, but with exaggerated fangs and twisted forms. Some of the carvings depicted what appeared to be people kneeling before these creatures, their hands raised in worship or possibly in fear. A shiver ran down my spine. The carvings were old, far older than any Native American petroglyphs I'd ever seen. This was something different, something older. I was about to take a closer look when a sound echoed through the cave, a deep, resonant growl that made my blood run cold. I froze, gripping my rifle. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a wolf. It was something else. I turned to leave, but before I could move, the darkness ahead of me shifted. Two pinpricks of glowing amber light emerged, hovering just above the ground. They blinked once, twice. Then they began to move toward me. Panic surged through me, but years of training kept me from bolting. Slowly, I backed away, my flashlight shaking slightly in my grasp. The creature, whatever it was, stayed just beyond the reach of my light, its massive form barely distinguishable in the shadows, but I could feel it watching me. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted back toward the cave entrance. The thing behind me let out a sound, a mix between a snarl and a low, guttural whisper. It sent a wave of primal fear through me, but I didn't stop running. I burst out into the early morning light, gasping for breath. The forest was alive again, birds chirping, the distant howls of wolves echoing through the valley. But I knew better. Something ancient was down there, something that wasn't meant to be found. I radioed my findings to my supervisor, omitting certain details that I knew would get me dismissed as a lunatic. That night, as I lay in my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. When I closed my eyes, I saw the cave, the carvings, the glowing eyes in the dark. The next day, I returned to the cave with a team, but it was gone. The fallen tree had shifted, revealing nothing but solid earth where the entrance had been. No cave, no markings, no sign that anything had ever been there. I spent weeks searching for it, scouring old maps, speaking with local historians, even consulting native elders who had stories of ancient spirits that roamed Yellowstone long before it became a national park. But there was nothing, no record of a cave, no mention of the symbols I had seen. Had I imagined it? Had exhaustion and paranoia gotten the better of me? I still don't know. But sometimes, late at night, when the park is still and the wind is just right. I swear I hear it, that same low guttural whisper drifting through the trees. And I know that whatever I found that night is still out there, waiting, and it's watching. The Vanishing Trail. I've worked as a Yellowstone Park ranger for 12 years, and in that time, I've seen a lot. Lost hikers, aggressive wildlife, even the occasional poacher trying to slip through under the cover of darkness. But nothing ever came close to what happened last fall, a mystery that still haunts me. It started with a routine call. A hiker, Daniel Whitaker, had been reported missing by his wife. They'd set out on a well-marked trail near the Beckler River, one they'd hiked many times before. But when Daniel stopped to take a photo and told his wife he'd catch up, he never did. Search and rescue was called in after she waited for 2 hours without a sign of him. I was assigned to lead the search. At first, everything seemed normal. No sign of struggle, no tracks leading off the trail. It was as if he had simply vanished. We scoured the area, calling his name, checking riverbanks, even deploying drones. Nothing. Then we found his backpack. It was sitting upright against a tree, untouched. His camera was still inside, along with his water bottle and a half-eaten protein bar. But his phone, his only means of communication, was missing. The weirdest part, the tree it rested against had deep, vertical gashes in the bark. Not claw marks, not anything that looked natural. Just long, deliberate cuts, spaced evenly apart, like something had scraped it over and over. I tried not to let it get to me, but there was something unsettling about the whole thing. The air in that spot was different, too still, too quiet. Even the usual chatter of birds and rustling of small animals seemed absent. We pressed on, but as night fell, we had to call off the search until morning. That night, I camped near the site, unable to shake the feeling that we were missing something. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound, something faint, almost like a voice. I crawled out of my tent and listened. It was distant, but there. Help. Me. My blood ran cold. It was coming from deeper in the woods, off the trail. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, but when I turned toward the sound, it stopped. I called out Daniel's name, but silence followed. I knew better than to go charging in alone at night, so I forced myself to wait until morning. At dawn, I led the team in the direction I'd heard the voice. About a mile in, we found something chilling. Daniel's phone, lying in the middle of a clearing. It was still on, still had battery, but the screen was shattered. When we checked the photos, the last one sent a shiver down my spine. It was blurry, but it showed trees just like the ones around us. And in the center of the frame, barely visible, was a figure. It was tall, almost inhumanly so, standing between the trunks. The shape was wrong, its limbs too long, its head slightly tilted as if watching. The timestamp said it was taken minutes after Daniel disappeared. We searched that area for days. No tracks, no other signs, no Daniel. On the 5th day, we found his shoe, a single hiking boot near a creek bed, pristine, as if it had been placed there deliberately. There were no other clothes, no footprints leading to or away from it, just the boot, sitting there like a marker. We scoured the creek, diving into the icy water, hoping for any sign of Daniel. Nothing. It was like he had stepped out of his own existence and into something else. Officially, the case remains unsolved. Some believe he got lost and fell into the river. Others say he wandered too far and succumbed to the elements. But I don't buy it. I know these woods. I know how nature reclaims things, how it leaves clues, even in death. But with Daniel, it was as if the earth itself swallowed him whole. Sometimes, when I patrol that trail alone, I get the sense I'm being watched. The wind shifts in ways it shouldn't. The birds fall silent. And once, just once, I swore I heard it again. That distant voice, whispering through the trees. Help me. The forest holds secrets, things older than any of us can comprehend. And I fear that one of those secrets took Daniel Whitaker that day. But the worst part? I think it's still out there, watching, waiting. Echoes in the mist. I've been a Yellowstone Park ranger for 15 years. I've seen nature at its most beautiful and its most unforgiving. But there are some things that happen here, things that don't make sense, things that make you question what you know about the world. Last summer, I encountered something that still keeps me up at night. It started with a call from the Firehole River trailhead. A tourist, Emily Carter, had gone missing while hiking alone. Her fiancé, Jason, reported that she had been ahead of him on the trail. He stopped to tie his boot, and when he looked up, she was gone. No scream, no struggle, just vanished. He searched frantically before calling us. I took point on the search. At first, it seemed routine. Maybe she had wandered off the trail and gotten turned around. It happened more often than people thought. But after an hour with no sign, not even a footprint, we started to worry. Her fiancé was beside himself, swearing up and down that she couldn't have gone far. And yet, the forest was silent, as if it had swallowed her whole. Then we found her phone. It was lying in the middle of the trail, screen cracked, the camera app still open. I tapped the screen, and the last photo made my stomach turn. It showed the trees ahead of her, but something was off. There was a shadow in the frame, barely visible between the trunks. Tall, unnaturally tall, too slender to be human. The timestamp showed it had been taken mere minutes before Jason realized she was missing. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't say anything to the others, but I could tell some of them felt it too. An unease in the air, like the woods were watching us. We pressed on, following the trail deeper into the trees, calling her name. No response. The sun started to set. We should have turned back, regrouped for the morning, but something kept pushing me forward. That's when we heard it. A whisper. Help me. It was faint, carried by the wind, almost lost in the rustling leaves. But it was there. Jason swore it was Emily's voice. We ran toward the sound, deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thicker, the shadows darker. That's when we saw something that made my blood turn cold. There, in a small clearing, stood an old cabin. It wasn't marked on any map, and I had never seen it before in all my years patrolling this area. The wood was dark with age, the windows covered in grime. The door was slightly ajar. I stepped forward, heart pounding. Emily? My voice barely rose above a whisper. No answer. Jason shoved past me and ran inside. I followed, flashlight cutting through the gloom. The inside was empty. No furniture, no signs of life. Just dust and the smell of damp wood. But the walls. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that ran from floor to ceiling, claw marks, human fingernails. Then the whisper came again. Help me. Jason turned, eyes wild. Did you hear that? She's here. The whisper grew louder, overlapping, voices blending together in a chorus of pain. My skin crawled. I shined my flashlight across the room and froze. In the corner, there was a hole in the floor, an old, rotting trapdoor slightly ajar. Jason moved toward it, but I grabbed his arm. Wait. Something was wrong. Everything in me screamed to leave, but Jason wrenched away, yanking open the trapdoor. Darkness yawned beneath us. A foul smell rose from below. Damp earth, rot, something else I couldn't name. My flashlight beam barely pierced the blackness. Jason didn't hesitate. He climbed down the rickety wooden ladder, calling Emily's name. I followed, every muscle in my body tense. The cellar was small, lined with crumbling stone walls. In the center, a pile of old, tattered clothing. And bones, too many bones. Jason let out a strangled cry, stepping back. I grabbed his arm, ready to pull him out of there, when something shifted in the darkness. A shape. A figure that had been crouched in the shadows, slowly rising to its full height. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall. Too tall. Its limbs were long and thin, its fingers tipped with something sharp. The thing tilted its head, studying us. Then, in a voice that did not belong in this world, it whispered, "Help me." Jason screamed. I grabbed him and hauled him up the ladder. The thing moved, too fast, too smooth, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. We hit the ground floor, slamming the trapdoor shut, just as something heavy crashed against it from below. We ran, out of the cabin, into the woods, sprinting until our lungs burned. The whisper followed us, growing fainter as we neared the main trail. Then, silence. The search continued for days. We never found Emily. The cabin? When we tried to return, it was gone. No trace of it. Just untouched forest where it should have been. Jason left Yellowstone a broken. Man, I stayed. But I don't go near the Firehole River Trail anymore. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I still hear it. A whisper in the trees. Help me. The forest never forgets. Yellowstone National Park was beautiful, but at times, it felt ancient. Older than anything alive today, including its visitors. Its vast stretches of forest, the steaming geysers, and the jagged mountain ranges held stories of the past, remnants of old civilizations and creatures that had roamed these lands long before the park's inception. It was a place where the ground beneath your feet could seem to whisper forgotten secrets, and the shadows among the trees could easily hide something sinister. For a park ranger like Hannah Bell, these wilds had become her second home. She'd been patrolling the park's remote edges for 5 years, taking up the mantle after her father had passed away, another in a long line of Bell Rangers who had served Yellowstone faithfully. Hannah had a good sense of the land, the wildlife, and the people who wandered through the park. Most of the time, it was peaceful. Visitors came, they hiked, they photographed, and they left, sometimes with stories of bear sightings, sometimes with tales of unexpected wildlife encounters. But the stories never felt dangerous, not here, not in Yellowstone, at least not until now. It had started with a strange sighting. On a late October afternoon, when the crisp air already held the chill of impending winter, Hannah had noticed something odd near the Yellowstone River. There were footprints, large, human-like prints that seemed to be too well defined to have been made by someone just passing through. They looked as though they were deliberate, as though they had been left intentionally, carefully positioned. The prints led Hannah deep into the thick forest. It wasn't unusual for rangers to find strange marks left by hikers or the occasional lost animal, but these felt wrong. There was a darkness to the tracks, a sense that they were not merely a part of nature but something more ominous. She couldn't explain it, but the feeling gnawed at her. She followed the trail for hours, weaving through the dense pines, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the forest in long, thin shadows, she found it. The clearing was small, surrounded by thick trees that seemed to block out the fading light. There, in the middle, was a body. The figure was lifeless, crumpled, and battered beyond recognition. Its face was unrecognizable, obscured by blood and bruising, the body torn in places, as if ravaged by something large, perhaps an animal. But there were signs, unmistakable signs, that it was no animal. The wounds were deliberate, calculated. Whoever or whatever had done this knew what they were doing. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. She was no medical expert, but even she could see this wasn't the result of a bear attack or some other animal. This was something else, something human. She quickly scanned the area, but there were no other signs, no footprints that didn't belong, no discarded items. Whoever had done this had covered their tracks well. By the time Hannah made it back to the ranger station, the sun had set, and the cold had settled in. She immediately called it in to her superiors, her voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and concern. It didn't take long for the FBI to get involved. A crime in a national park, especially something as brutal as this, was serious business. Agent Sarah Lawson, a seasoned investigator from the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit, arrived in Yellowstone the next morning. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and intense. Her presence had a way of commanding the room, even in a place as vast and untamable as Yellowstone. "You did the right thing, Ranger Bell," Agent Lawson said, her voice low but firm. "I'll handle the rest." Hannah was about to protest, but the look in Lawson's eyes told her it was not a matter for discussion. They had different skills, different strengths. Lawson had seen crime scenes like this before. She had the expertise. It wasn't long before they were back at the clearing, the body now covered and marked for transport. Lawson knelt next to it, examining the wounds. Her breath came out in sharp bursts as the cold air hit her lungs. "This wasn't an animal," Lawson muttered. "This was personal." Hannah stood a few feet away, her eyes scanning the trees, the ground, anything that might give away more about the killer. A part of her, a small part, was still in disbelief that something like this had happened here, in her Yellowstone. "We'll need to process the area," Lawson continued, "but something tells me this isn't the first. Look around. This feels like a ritual." Hannah's stomach churned. She hadn't even wanted to consider the possibility of multiple victims, but now, as she stood there, taking in the stillness of the forest around, them, she couldn't ignore the mounting dread creeping up her spine. As the days went by, more bodies began to surface, always in remote parts of the park, always disfigured in the same manner, always left in eerily similar positions. The victims were from various walks of life, hikers, tourists, even a park employee, but the method remained consistent. The killer was careful, deliberate, and patient. The park, once a sanctuary of tranquility, had become a playground for something much darker. After a week of investigation, Agent Lawson pulled Hannah aside in the ranger station's office. The air inside was warm, but there was no escaping the chill creeping into her bones. "I've been reviewing the bodies we've found so far," Lawson began, her tone unshakably calm. "And I think we're dealing with a serial killer, but there's something odd about these killings. They're too well-planned." Hannah frowned, leaning forward. "Planned? You mean like a method?" "Exactly. The killer doesn't just kill, they stage the bodies. They leave them in positions that are symbolic, almost ritualistic, like they're trying to send a message." Hannah's pulse quickened. She had seen these patterns in the work of famous serial killers, killers who carefully orchestrated their crimes as if to play some dark game with law enforcement, or with the world. But a killer in Yellowstone? A park so vast, so remote? "I don't understand," Hannah said quietly. "What's the message?" "That's what we need to figure out." Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that something about the park itself was a key piece of the puzzle. Yellowstone had always been a place of history, a place where nature reigned supreme and humanity was just a visitor. But what if there was something more? What if the killer's connection to this land ran deeper than just the geography? As the investigation deepened, a chilling discovery was made. The killer seemed to have been a part of the park's history, an old ranger who had gone missing years ago. They had never found his body, and his disappearance had been written off as a tragic accident. But the pieces were now beginning to fall into place. The man had left behind a journal, an unsettling account of his time in the park, filled with strange notes and descriptions of rituals involving the park's most secluded areas. The journal was filled with cryptic phrases about the land and the darkness beneath the earth. As Hannah read through it, she realized that the killer might have been trying to fulfill some twisted legacy. The park's natural beauty, its raw wilderness, might have been a perfect stage for his horrific vision. Hannah and Lawson tracked the killer to the heart of Yellowstone, a place few ventured, the Black Canyon of the Yellowstone. It was here, surrounded by cliffs and the roaring river below, that the killer had chosen to make his final stand. The air was thick with tension as they approached the isolated cave where the killer had been hiding. The land around them was silent, almost unnaturally so, and the very ground felt alive with the killer's presence. "You ready?" Lawson asked, her voice steady despite the growing sense of impending danger. Hannah nodded, gripping her flashlight tightly. The hunt was over. The killer would be brought to justice. And yet, something told her the park's ancient secrets might not let go so easily. With a single step, they crossed the threshold into the darkness.